March 1, 1950. Inside the Oval Office, time appears to slow. President Harry Truman does not move. He does not speak. He simply stares at the paper in his hands, reading the same lines again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. They do not. 6 months earlier, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. That moment alone shattered a strategic illusion that Washington had carefully protected since Hiroshima. American generals believed they had at least a decade of uncontested power, a window of absolute deterrence. That window closed overnight. But what Truman is reading now is worse than the loss of monopoly. This document does not describe espionage in the traditional sense. There was no break-in, no bribed guard, no stolen safe. The secret was not stolen in a moment of weakness, but handed over deliberately, with full awareness of its consequences. By a man who had full clearance, a man who helped solve the mathematical riddles that made the bomb possible, a man who sat in the same rooms as Oppenheimer, Teller, and Bethe, listening, calculating, remembering. A man who never raised suspicion. As Truman's eyes reach the final paragraph, the room feels smaller. The weight of the decision that now confronts him is almost unbearable. This is not just a betrayal of security, it is a betrayal of trust at the highest level of science itself. The name at the bottom of the page is short and unremarkable, the kind that would never draw attention under normal circumstances. Klaus Fuchs. A refugee physicist, a British citizen, a man the Allies once considered a symbol of what they were fighting for. And now, the single most destructive traitor in modern history. To understand why this confession matters, you must return to the moment when America first learned the truth. September 23, 1949. President Truman steps before a cluster of microphones and delivers a statement that takes less than a minute to read, but generations to absorb. The Soviet Union, he says, has tested an atomic device. Across the United States, people freeze in their living rooms. Radios hum softly as the implications sink in. The bomb was supposed to be America's final advantage, the ultimate deterrence. Proof that no enemy would ever dare challenge its power directly. That belief vanishes instantly. Only 4 years after Hiroshima, the nuclear age has become global. Military planners scramble to revise war scenarios that no longer make sense. Politicians demand to know how this happened so fast. Newspapers speculate wildly, searching for explanations that sound less frightening than the truth. But inside intelligence agencies, fear sharpens in suspicion. Because Soviet science did not merely catch up, it leapt forward. Their bomb design shows an understanding of implosion physics that suggests more than experimentation. It suggests instruction, precision.
Insight. Someone did not just help them, someone taught them. While the American public searched for explanations that felt safe, intelligence agencies moved in the opposite direction. They searched for answers that felt dangerous. The most unsettling truth was this: the Soviet atomic program did not look like one built through trial and error. It looked like one built with a roadmap. Inside a small, windowless building in Arlington, Virginia, a handful of cryptanalysts were already staring at that truth every day. The program they worked on was called Venona. Officially, Venona did not exist. Its very name was classified. Even many senior officials in Washington were unaware of it. Since 1943, American codebreakers had been intercepting encrypted Soviet intelligence cables sent from Moscow to its global spy network. For years, Venona produced almost nothing. The Soviets used one-time pads,
a system theoretically impossible to crack if used correctly. Most messages remained unreadable, strings of numbers, fragments of nonsense, dead ends that led nowhere. But war creates pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. Soviet intelligence, rushing to communicate across continents, reused portions of encryption keys. It was a tiny error, almost invisible. But for cryptanalysts trained to notice patterns, it was enough. Slowly, painstakingly, message by message, Venona began to speak. Not in full sentences, not in confessions, but in hints. References to meetings, to couriers, to unnamed sources inside Western governments, and then, buried among cables discussing diplomatic gossip and industrial espionage, something far more alarming appeared. The messages pointed towards atomic research, Los Alamos, and a source with direct access to bomb design. The code name used was simple, almost dismissive. Rest. At first, analysts did not understand what they were seeing, but as more cables were decrypted, a picture began to form. Rest is not relaying rumors or partial data. He was providing solutions, mathematical clarity, engineering confidence. Whoever Rest was, he was not guessing. Whoever Rest was, he was not observing from the outside. He was inside. For the men and women working Venona, this discovery was terrifying for a reason few outside intelligence ever understood. They could not act on it. Venona was too valuable to expose. Revealing its existence would alert the Soviets that their codes were compromised. The entire program would die overnight. So they watched. They read cables discussing secrets they could not stop from flowing. They watched history unfold in slow motion, knowing a catastrophe was coming, and knowing they were powerless to intervene. Somewhere inside the Allied atomic project, a man was feeding the Soviet Union the knowledge to change the world. And Venona could only whisper his shadow. Long before Klaus Fuchs ever heard the name Venona, he had already decided where he stood in the world. To understand that decision, you must understand what it means to lose everything before the age of 30. Fuchs did not grow up dreaming of communism. He did not grow up dreaming of espionage. He grew up believing in logic, order, and moral clarity. Those beliefs were beaten out of him, literally, by Nazi fists. When the regime took his family apart piece by piece, it did not just destroy his past, it poisoned his future. Trust, for Fuchs, became a luxury he no longer believed in. Britain gave him safety. America gave him opportunity, but neither gave him certainty. To Fuchs, nations were temporary, governments were self-interested, alliances shifted when convenient, only power remained constant. And atomic power, he came to believe, was too absolute to be owned by one side alone. This belief did not arrive suddenly. It hardened slowly, reinforced by every meeting he attended where Stalin was spoken of as a necessary evil rather than an ally, reinforced by every conversation that treated the Soviet Union as expendable once the war was won. When he began speaking to communist contacts, Fuchs did not see himself as a spy. He saw himself as a corrective force. In his mind, secrecy itself was the crime. If America controlled the bomb alone, what would stop it from reshaping the world by threat alone? If Britain and the United States decided who could possess ultimate power, how is that different from tyranny? These were not drunken thoughts or reckless impulses. They were cold, structured conclusions. And once Fuchs reached them, he never revisited them again. By 1943, Klaus Fuchs was living two lives so cleanly separated that even he began to believe they could never collide. By day, he was the model scientist, dependable, methodical, apolitical in appearance. His colleagues trusted him because he gave them no reason not to. He arrived on time, he solved problems, he never spoke more than necessary. By night, he became something else entirely. Alone in his room, Fuchs copied documents by hand. He memorized equations the way others memorized poetry. He broke complex designs down into mental images he could recall weeks later without a single note. There were no dramatic meetings, no whispered passwords, no gunfights in alleyways. Espionage in Fuchs's world was quiet and devastating. Each time he passed information to a courier, he felt no fear, only reassurance, another step toward balance, another safeguard against monopoly. When the Quebec Agreement merged British and American atomic efforts, it felt to him like confirmation that he was right. Power was consolidating, secrets were narrowing, decisions that would shape the future of humanity were being made by fewer and fewer people. So when he was selected for transfer to the United States, he accepted without hesitation.
Los Alamos was not just the center of atomic research, it was the center of the future. Los Alamos was not a town, it was a controlled experiment in human behavior. Scientists lived behind fences, mail was censored, conversations were monitored, armed guards patrolled day and night. Every resident knew they were being watched, even if they never saw who was watching. Paranoia was part of the environment. And yet, inside this fortress of secrecy, Klaus Fuchs moved almost invisibly. He did not attract attention because he never demanded it. He did not push theories aggressively. He did not dominate discussions. He waited, listened, and contributed exactly what was needed. His role in the theoretical division placed him at the core of the implosion problem: how to compress plutonium evenly, violently, and perfectly enough to trigger a nuclear explosion. It was one of the hardest challenges in physics, and Fuchs solved it. His calculations helped shape the bomb that would later destroy Nagasaki. His work earned the respect of men who would become legends. No one questioned his loyalty. After all, who would suspect the quiet refugee who had already lost everything to tyranny? Every spy story needs a moment where secrecy leaves the abstract and becomes physical. For Klaus Fuchs, that moment arrived in the form of a man who looked like no one. That man was Harry Gold, a courier whose greatest weapon was how easily he was forgotten. Gold did not resemble an agent. He had no sharp edges, no commanding presence, no charisma. He blended into crowds because crowds forgot him the moment he passed. To Soviet intelligence, that forgettability was his greatest asset. Gold's instructions were simple. He was not to question, not to judge, not to analyze the information he carried. His job was movement, packages from one place to another, silence in between. When Gold arrived in New Mexico in the spring of 1945, he carried no weapon. He did not need one. The danger was already inside his coat. The meeting with Fuchs was arranged carefully, stripped of unnecessary detail. No repeated patterns, no written instructions, nothing that could be traced. Late at night, under the cover of routine, Fuchs drove his old blue Buick toward Santa Fe. Gold waited near a small mission church, the kind of place no one remembered visiting and no one bothered to watch. When Gold entered the passenger seat, there was no dramatic exchange, no code phrase, no confirmation of identity. They simply drove, letting the silence do the work that words could not. For miles, they spoke about ordinary things: the weather, the roads, trivial complaints. It was the kind of conversation that lowered defenses because it meant nothing. But both men understood exactly what was happening. When they reached a ridge overlooking the scattered lights of Santa Fe, Fuchs had turned off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, deliberate. From the back seat, Fuchs lifted an envelope thicker than anything Gold had ever carried before. His hands did not shake from fear. They shook from weight. Inside were the complete implosion designs of the plutonium bomb. Not theory, not speculation, engineering reality. This was Fat Man, the completed implosion design of the plutonium bomb. Gold did not ask questions. He did not open the envelope. He did not thank Fuchs. He did not need to. Both men knew that the exchange itself was the point of no return. When they parted, neither expected to see the other again. They were right. Gold's journey east took nearly 2 weeks, and every mile felt like borrowed time. He traveled by bus, by train, by plane. He slept lightly. He avoided conversation. Every stranger felt like a threat. Every sudden stop made his heart race. The envelope never left his possession. At night, he buried himself in a copy of Great Expectations, pretending to read while his mind replayed the consequences of discovery. Prison would be the best possible outcome. Execution was far more likely. Gold did not think about ideology. He did not think about balance or power. He thought about survival. Somewhere along the way, he began to understand that he was no longer transporting information. He was transporting history. When the package finally reached Soviet hands, the effect was immediate. Soviet physicists did not celebrate. They worked. The designs answered questions they had been stuck on for months. Problems that might have delayed their bomb for years suddenly collapsed into clarity. The roadmap was complete. July 16, 1945. Before dawn, the New Mexico desert is quiet in a way that feels ancient. Scientists gather behind protective barriers, shielding their eyes, waiting for a moment no one fully understands. Klaus Fuchs stands among them. He knows the calculations. He knows the yield estimates. He knows the physics that will turn theory into fire. But knowing does not prepare him for the reality. At 5:29 a.m., the countdown reaches 0. The explosion turns darkness into blinding light, erasing the horizon in an instant. For an instant, there is silence. Then the shockwave arrives, slamming into bodies and bones. The fireball climbs, folding into itself, rising into the sky like something alive. Around Fuchs, men cheer. Some shout in disbelief. Others stare in awe. A few weep openly. Someone quotes ancient scripture, grasping for language strong enough to match what they have seen. Fuchs has nothing. Inside him there is no triumph, no horror, only certainty. In that moment, a line is crossed that humanity will never truly step back from. From this moment forward, the world will never return to what it was. And unlike everyone else present, Fuchs knows something they do not.
And unlike everyone else present, Fuchs knows that this power is already shared. The monopoly ended before the bomb ever left the tower. In the months following Trinity, Klaus Fuchs continues his work as if nothing has changed. He attends meetings, he solves problems, he participates in discussions about future weapons, including one idea that exists only on paper, the hydrogen bomb. Fuchs does not hesitate. He passes theoretical discussions, early concepts, and speculative calculations to his handlers, not because the weapon exists, but because someday it will. And when that day comes, he believes no nation should reach it alone. Los Alamos remains sealed, guards remain vigilant, security remains intense, yet Fuchs operates undetected. Mail censorship means nothing to a man who memorizes instead of writing. Surveillance means little to someone who behaves exactly as expected. Loyalty checks fail when loyalty looks ordinary. Each month that passes feels like confirmation. He has outsmarted the system. But systems do not forget. They accumulate. By 1949, Venona has grown sharper. More cables align, more fragments connect. The picture that analysts once feared to imagine now stares back at them unmistakably. Rest was British. Rest had been in America in 1944. Rest understood implosion physics. There are only a handful of names that fit. MI5 reviews old files, including reports from 1940 that flagged Klaus Fuchs as a possible communist sympathizer. At the time, the warning was ignored. Britain needed his mind more than it feared his beliefs. Now, those files read like prophecy. The problem remains unchanged. Venona cannot be exposed. The only path forward is psychological. They need Fuchs to speak. Jim Scarden does not interrogate by force. He interrogates by erosion. When he first invites Fuchs to his office, the meeting feels harmless. Tea is poured. Polite questions are asked. The war is discussed as history rather than accusation. Scarden watches everything. The way Fuchs' fingers tap when certain dates are mentioned, the pause before answering seemingly innocent questions, the subtle tightening around the eyes when Los Alamos comes up. The second meeting feels similar. The third introduces pressure, but never openly, a reference to a leak, a suggestion that someone inside the program betrayed trust, a hypothetical scenario designed to provoke reaction. By the fourth meeting, Fuchs understands the truth. They know. What they know, he cannot be sure, but they know enough. On January 24, 1950, Scarden changes tactics.
He mentions a detail that only Rest would recognize, a meeting time, a calculation never officially shared. The mask cracks. Fuchs asks for time. 3 days later, Klaus Fuchs returns. He looks exhausted, pale, but composed. I have come to tell you everything. For 6 hours he speaks, calmly, methodically.
Without dramatics, he confirms meetings, names handlers, describes handoffs, and details exactly what he passed and when. Only once does his voice falter, when he describes handing over the implosion design for the plutonium bomb. That, he says quietly, was the worst thing I did. When Skardon asks why, the answer is not defensive. It is sincere. Fuchs says he believed he was preventing catastrophe by ensuring balance, that no single country should ever hold such power alone. He does not ask for forgiveness. He believes he acted correctly. Fuchs is sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum allowed for passing secrets to a wartime ally. But his confession does not end the story. It begins in avalanche. Harry Gold is arrested in Philadelphia. Faced with Fuchs's testimony, he collapses within hours. He names David Greenglass, a machinist at Los Alamos. Greenglass names his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg. By the end of 1950, an entire spy network lies exposed. America is no longer asking how the Soviets got the bomb. It is asking who else cannot be trusted. When the names Julius and Ethel Rosenberg first appear in FBI reports, they do not seem extraordinary. They are not scientists. They do not design bombs. They do not calculate implosion physics. They are ordinary Americans, living ordinary lives in New York. That is precisely why their arrest terrifies the public. Because if espionage is no longer confined to laboratories and intelligence agencies, then it can exist anywhere, in any apartment, in any family, behind any closed door. Julius Rosenberg had worked as an engineer during the war. His political beliefs were known. His associations had been quietly noted for years. But like so many others, he was never considered dangerous enough to matter. Until now. David Greenglass, desperate to save himself, points directly at his brother-in-law. He tells investigators that Julius recruited him, that information from Los Alamos flowed through family dinners and whispered conversations. Ethel Rosenberg's role is far less clear. The evidence against her is thin, circumstantial, and deeply contested. But in the climate forming around the case, ambiguity is not protection, it is suspicion. The Rosenbergs are arrested, then indicted, then placed at the center of a national reckoning. Their trial is not just about guilt or innocence. It becomes something larger, darker, and far more symbolic. America is no longer judging two people. It is judging itself. By the early 1950s, fear has become a political currency. Klaus Fuchs's confession has already proven what many Americans suspected but could not confirm, that betrayal did not come from the outside, it came from within. That realization spreads like an infection. Government employees are asked to sign loyalty oaths, professors lose their jobs for past associations, artists are blacklisted.
Careers vanish overnight on the basis of rumor alone. Neighbors begin watching neighbors. Silence becomes suspicious. Dissent becomes dangerous. In Washington, a junior senator from Wisconsin steps into the spotlight. Joseph McCarthy waves a list he claims contains the names of communists embedded throughout the government. The list changes. The accusations expand. The fear intensifies. It does not matter whether McCarthy's claims are true. What matters is that the public is ready to believe them. The logic is simple and brutal. If Klaus Fuchs could exist undetected for years, then anyone could be Klaus Fuchs. Trust becomes a liability. In 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are executed. They are the first American civilians put to death for espionage. The moment divides the nation. Some believe justice has been served. Others believe a line has been crossed that cannot be undone. Even decades later, historians will argue over the extent of their guilt and the fairness of their trial. But at the time, nuance has no place. Fear does not tolerate complexity. What remains undeniable is this: one British physicist's confession has now led to the deaths of American citizens. The chain reaction that began with a single decision inside Klaus Fuchs' mind has spread beyond his control. And it is still accelerating. January 31st, 1950. Barely a week after Klaus Fuchs confesses, President Truman announces a decision that will reshape the future. The United States will build the hydrogen bomb. This weapon will not simply destroy cities, it will erase them. The timing is not coincidence. If the Soviets obtained atomic secrets once, they could obtain them again. America cannot afford to fall behind. Deterrence must be absolute. Superiority must be unquestionable. Scientists are divided. Some warn that the hydrogen bomb will unleash forces humanity cannot control. Others argue that refusing to build it would be an act of self-destruction. The logic of fear wins. In November 1952, the United States detonates Ivy Mike, a hydrogen bomb with a yield so immense it vaporizes an entire Pacific island. The explosion is measured in megatons. The Soviets respond. By 1955, they have their own hydrogen bomb. The arms race has entered a phase from which there is no return. By the late 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union possess enough nuclear weapons to end human civilization many times over. Military strategists develop a phrase to describe this reality: mutually assured destruction. The idea is simple. If one side launches its weapons, the other will retaliate. No one survives. Therefore, no one dares to strike first. It is peace built on terror. The balance Klaus Fuchs claimed to seek has been achieved, but at a scale no one imagined. Cities live under the shadow of annihilation. Children practice duck-and-cover drills.
Missiles sit underground, waiting for orders that everyone hopes will never come. And yet, the bombs do not fall. Decade after decade, the world holds its breath. In 1959, after serving 9 years of his 14-year sentence, Klaus Fuchs is released from prison. He does not return to public life. He does not seek attention. He disappears quietly into East Germany, where he resumes work as a physicist behind the Iron Curtain. To the West, he becomes an embarrassment best forgotten. There are no interviews, no memoirs, no final justifications offered to the world. Those who encountered him in later years describe a man who appeared calm, almost serene, a man who never expressed regret in public, a man who believed to the end that history would judge him differently. The Cold War eventually ends without nuclear war. The balance holds, not because the danger disappeared, but because fear restrained it. Humanity survives its own most dangerous invention. And that leaves a question that refuses to disappear. Did Klaus Fuchs help prevent catastrophe by destroying monopoly? Or did he merely ensure that the next catastrophe would be global? There is no definitive answer. What is certain is this: one man, armed only with equations and conviction, altered the trajectory of the modern world. Not with a bomb, but by deciding who would hold it. And decades later, that same dilemma would return in a different form. A young intelligence contractor would face a choice between silence and exposure, between loyalty and conscience, between secrecy and consequence. History would ask the same question again, and once more, there would be no easy answer.